All right, so we're going to go over the quiz, and I am going to share my screen. So let's share the screen, and we're going to go over sentence structure. And so the week 6 instructor session, week 7 quiz. And so we're going to go over, before I go over this, I just want to, let me stop sharing the screen for just a second. Hold on. Oh yeah, stop share for a second. Yeah, so I want to go over that the first half of this class, we went over essay structure, and we went over how to do the 5-paragraph essay structure. And all of you who have done your final drafts, week 6 final drafts, have done an excellent job with your 5-paragraph essay structure. You have a thesis statement as the last sentence of your first paragraph and the first sentence of your last paragraph, and you have topic sentences that relate back to your thesis. Excellent work. So now the second half of the class, we're going to focus on learning APA, and we're going to be doing your essay 2 is going to be a comparison contrast essay. And so week 7 and 8 is going to be, week 7, 8, 11, and 12 will all be about the comparison contrast essay, where you compare and contrast two things. And so in week 7, we're going to go over, it's going to be pre-writing, where you're going to, week 7 forum, whereas pre-writing, where you're going to go tell me what topic, what your outline is going to be for your comparison contrast essay. And then in week 8, you're going to do a outline and or rough draft of your comparison contrast essay. So that's writing. So pre-writing and writing is week 7 and week 8. And then week 11 and 12 will be revision of your comparison contrast essay. So we're going to go through the same writing process that we went through in essay 1. We're going to do it for essay 2 as well. So to review the writing process, it's pre-writing, writing, and rewriting. So pre-writing will be weeks 7 and 8. Pre-writing will be week 7. Writing will be week 8. And then rewriting will be weeks 11 and 12. And then you'll be done with this class. And then weeks 9 and 10, you're going to be working on the persuasive essay and APA. So you take a 2-week break. You're going to be taking a 2-week break from your comparison contrast essay in weeks 9 and 10, and then you'll return to the comparison contrast essay in weeks 11 and 12. So remember, 7, 8, 11, 12 is your writing process for your comparison contrast essay. So now, without further ado, I'm going to go over your very last quiz, and I'm hoping that you're all enjoying summer session 2, and that you're enjoying the hot weather that we're having. And also during revision week, during week 6, which is where we are now, I always advise students to walk away from their paper and take a break. Go take a walk, enjoy the summer weather, and then come back and revise your paper. That way you don't overlook your mistakes. Also in the announcements, I posted a revision techniques where you can look over the revision techniques handout on different ways in which you can revise your paper during this very last stage of the writing process for essay 1. All right, so without further ado, I will now go over your week 7 quiz, which will be the very last quiz you're going to be taking in this class. And so week 7 quiz is going to be about sentence structure. So without further ado, I'm going to go over sentence structure. Share my screen, and I do this and this. And so here, we're going to go over the week 7 grammar concepts, week 7 practice quiz, and I will do an introduction to the comparison contrast essay. So let's go over the sentence structure fun exercise. So sentences can be joined together by either a coordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction, or a transition word. All of the following sentences are joined together by different conjunctions. If the conjunction is a subordinating conjunction, then the sentence becomes a dependent clause, and you need another sentence to complete the thought. These are known as complex sentences. If the sentences are joined by coordinating conjunctions like fanboys, for, and, but, or, nor, so, yet, then you have a compound sentence. You need to learn the difference between these conjunctions to avoid sentence fragments. In student essays, I am always commenting to students, learn sentence structure to avoid sentence fragments. I have said this comment in student essays hundreds of times. So today you will learn sentence structure so you can avoid sentence fragments. First, you need to learn how to recognize the three basic sentence types in English. So in English, you have the simple sentence, the compound sentence, complex sentence, compound sentence, and complex sentence. And so you should Google yourself a transition word list so that you know how to make compound sentences, and Google yourself subordinating word lists so you know how to create complex sentences. So let's take a look at these sentences. John was fat. Mary was thin. John was fat, but Mary was thin. John was fat, yet Mary was thin. Although John was fat, Mary was thin. Mary was thin, even though John was fat. John was fat, whereas Mary was thin. John was fat, nevertheless, Mary was thin. So, what kinds of sentences are these? That's what we're going to be learning, is to differentiate all of these sentences, because they all mean the same thing. You have a fat John and a thin Mary, and yet you can express that idea in three different ways: in simple sentences, in compound sentences, or in complex sentences. So let's start with simple sentence. What is a simple sentence? A simple sentence is a subject, a verb, plus an object. A simple sentence is a complete thought, also known as an independent clause. Jack gets good grades. Jack is the subject, gets is the verb, good is the adjective, grades is the object. Jack studies hard. Jack is the subject, studies is the verb, hard is the adjective. Jack is tall. Jack is the subject, is the verb, tall is the adjective. And so as you can see, the major sentence structure for a simple sentence: subject, verb, agreement, subject, verb, adjective. You can also have subject, verb, infinitive phrase. Mary likes to dress up. So to dress up is an infinitive phrase. Steve rarely loses at the casinos. And so at the casinos is a prepositional phrase that shows time and place. So a prepositional phrase is at the table, on the table, under the table, at 5 o'clock, at 6 o'clock. So that a prepositional phrase shows time and place. Other examples of simple sentences. Robert likes to dance. So Robert is the subject, likes is the verb, and to dance is the infinitive object. Up the hill, prepositional phrase. Sits is a verb. An old house, that's the subject. That's a simple sentence. And up the hill sits an old house has the same meaning as the old house sits up the hill. And so you have subject, verb, prepositional phrase. The police station is down the street. Police station is subject, verb is, down the street is prepositional phrase. Down the street is the police station, which means the same thing as the police station is down the street. You have the prepositional phrase, the verb, and the subject. So when you have a simple sentence, you have an independent clause, which is a complete thought and a complete sentence. On the other hand, a dependent clause is an incomplete sentence and is a sentence fragment that you have to avoid losing points on your paper. The second kind of sentence is a compound sentence. Compound, the word compound means two, so that when you have two sentences joined by fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, that's known as a compound sentence. And so a compound sentence has fanboys in it. Fanboys are coordinating conjunctions that join two sentences together, and they are two sentences of equal significance. And so here, John and Mary ate and slept. That's not a compound sentence. That's a simple sentence, actually, with a compound subject and a compound verb. But when I have John ate steak, but Mary ate salad, that's a compound sentence because here you have an independent clause, John ate steak, then you have your coordinating conjunction, fanboys, and then you have Mary ate salad. So when you have an independent clause, conjunction, an independent clause, that's a compound sentence. And you always have to put a comma before fanboys, here with but. Mary slept in a bed, but Mary slept on the floor. Now what's wrong with this sentence? It's missing a comma here. So that is a common mistake that I see in essays where people forget to put in a comma before fanboys. Jack gets good grades. For, he studies hard. For is another way of saying because. So if I say Jack gets good grades because he studies hard, has the same meaning as Jack gets good grades, comma, for he studies hard. So that is a compound sentence. Jack is tall, but Mary is short. Steve gambles all the time, comma, yet he loses rarely at the casinos. Mary likes to dress up, comma, so she can feel good about herself. Robert eats steak, comma, and he likes to dance. Usually Mr. Smith goes to the park, comma, or he goes to the beach to take his walks. And so here's an actual quiz, a quiz question. I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. So in this sentence, for means because. And this is an example of a compound sentence. Subordinating to the next, so now we're done with complex sentences. And now the next kind of sentence we're going to go over is a complex sentence. So far we've gone over a simple sentence, which is subject, verb, object, or subject, verb, adjective, or subject, verb, prepositional phrase, or subject, verb, infinitive phrase. Then we went over a compound sentence, which is independent clause, conjunction, independent clause. Now the last kind of sentence, complex sentence. In a complex sentence, you have a dependent clause and an independent clause put together in order to form one sentence. A dependent clause always starts with a subordinating conjunction. All of these words are subordinating conjunctions. And whenever you start a sentence with these words, you automatically turn that sentence into a subordinating conjunction and into a subordinating clause and into a dependent clause. So here are some examples. So here, whenever you use these words at the beginning of a sentence, you're turning that sentence into a sentence fragment because that sentence cannot stand alone. So if I were simply to say, after John eats dinner, okay, that can't stand alone. Although he is smart, also cannot stand alone. So any sentence that starts with these words are sentence fragments. And any sentence that starts with these words are also dependent clauses. So let's make it clear. A dependent clause is the same thing as a sentence fragment. It's the same thing as an incomplete thought. And you want to avoid that at all costs. And in order to make a subordinating clause complete, you need to add another independent clause. So that's why when we formulate a complex sentence, we have a dependent clause together with an independent clause to form that complete thought. So if I simply say, after John eats dinner, that's the dependent clause. After John eats dinner, he goes to bed. That would make it a complete thought. After John eats dinner, he goes to bed. That whole thing is known as a complex sentence. So after John eats dinner, comma. So if the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you need to put the comma. So after John eats dinner, comma. And here, these are all examples of complex sentences where you have a dependent clause and an independent clause together as one sentence. After John eats dinner, that's the dependent clause. He goes to bed. That's the independent clause with a comma in the middle. Although Jack is fat, comma, he eats very little. As soon as the alarm clock rings, comma, Steve jumps out of bed. As long as I study hard, dependent clause, comma, I can get good grades, independent clause. Because Michael Jordan is tall, comma, he plays great basketball. Before I go to bed, comma, I brush my teeth. If I avoid sick people, I can catch fewer colds. Once I get my driver's license, comma, I will buy my own car. Rather than spend a lot of money on clothes, I like to make my own clothes. So here in all of these sentences, you have a dependent clause that starts the sentence, and then you have to have a comma and then the independent clause. So if the subordinate clause is before the main sentence, use a comma. Since I lost my husband, I have to get a job. Unless you do your job perfectly, you will be fired. When I was younger, I used to have more energy. So the bolded words, all of these bolded words are all subordinating conjunctions that start a dependent clause. If the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, then you don't need to put a comma. John goes to bed after he eats dinner. Notice how there's no comma there. He eats very little. No comma here. He eats very little, although he is fat. Steve jumps out of bed as soon as the alarm clock rings. I can get good grades as long as I study hard. Michael Jordan plays great basketball because he is tall. I brush my teeth before I go to bed. I can catch fewer colds if I avoid sick people. Michael Jordan plays great basketball because he is tall. All of these sentences are complex sentences. So a sentence fragment would be after John eats dinner, and a complete sentence would be after John eats dinner, he goes to bed. Now, when you have what is an adjective clause? So when you have an adjective clause, then all the rules change. Yeah, so when you have who, whom, whose, which, that. And so when you have an adjective clause, if an adjective clause is a clause, this is a clause, I love the table that is made of wood. That is made of wood is an adjective clause that modifies the word, the noun, table. So that's the same thing as saying a wooden table. And so when you have an adjective clause at the end of the sentence, you use one comma. If the adjective clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you use two commas. And so if you want to learn more about that, you can look up appositives and restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. So John is French. John lives in Paris. So if you have two sentences that have the same subject, then you can combine those two sentences together with John, who is French, lives in Paris. And so here you have an adjective clause at the beginning of a sentence that modifies John, and then you need a comma before the adjective clause, and you need a comma after the adjective clause. If the adjective clause is at the end of the sentence, you only need one comma. So you have a totally different set of rules for commas if you're dealing with adjective clauses. Who, whom, whose, which, that. And an adjective clause is the same thing as a relative clause. When you have this construction, who is French is a dependent clause. John lives in Paris is the independent clause. When you put the whole sentence together, that is also a complex sentence. Okay, so here you have dependent and independent clause. So to repeat, in a nutshell, you have three kinds of sentences. You have the simple sentence, John drinks water. That's a simple sentence. John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. That's a compound sentence. Although John drinks a lot of water, he is still thirsty. That's a complex sentence. So we have three different kinds of sentences in English. Simple, compound, complex. You also have a fourth kind called compound complex, but I'm going to go over that in the week 12 lesson. So let's go over your quiz. All of these sentences that are in blue are the sentences that are going to appear on your quiz. So you need to memorize the stuff that's in blue so that you could do well on your quiz. So here on your quiz, if you aren't going to make it, please call. This is a correct sentence. On the quiz, they're going to ask you, is this a complete sentence or not a complete sentence? Is this a dependent or independent clause? And the answer is, it is an independent clause. It is a complete sentence. It's a complex sentence. So here you have a dependent clause, if you aren't going to make it, comma, and then you have a complete sentence, please call. It takes skill to call in sick at work with a phony excuse. This is also a simple sentence. So here it is the subject, takes is the verb, skill to call in sick with a phony excuse, that's all an object. So it's subject, verb, object. So that's a complete sentence. It's a simple sentence. So it's a complete thought. It's an independent clause. Anytime you see the word complete sentence, that's the same thing as independent clause. First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. This is also a complete sentence, an independent clause, because one is the subject, must be sure is the verb, that helping verb with the infinitive verb. Then to speak directly to the boss is an infinitive object. So you have subject, verb, object. That's a complete sentence. It's a simple sentence. Today, I will be making appointments on the phone. That's correct. Here you have an adverb of time. Then you have subject, will be making, is the verb, appointments on the phone, object. So subject, verb, object. It's a simple sentence. It's an independent clause. When I was 4, my father taught me how to ride a bike. And so here you have a dependent clause, when I was 4, and then my father taught me how to ride a bike. That's an independent clause. So when you have a dependent clause and an independent clause together as one sentence, that's a complex sentence. That's correct. And then I'm going to go over why these are not correct. At the age of 4, my father taught me how to ride a bike. So your father was 4 years old when he taught his son how to ride a bike. So we're going to go over misplaced dangling modifiers later in this lesson as to why these sentences, why this sentence is wrong and why this sentence is correct. At the age of 4, I learned to ride a bike. So you're missing, so you have to rewrite the sentence. I will go over why that sentence is wrong later in this lesson. So I could tell the room had been dusted, comma, for all the pictures were crooked. So this is a complete sentence. It's a compound sentence because here you have you have one sentence, an independent clause, then you have a comma, then you have your coordinating conjunction, and another independent clause. So that is a compound sentence. So that is a correct sentence. All right, so like I said, we're going to be going over modifiers. What are modifiers? Modifiers are like adjectives. They describe the noun that's closest to them. And so here a modifier modifies the noun. In other words, it's like a description. So modifiers are words that provide details and descriptions about the object. And so John has a blue shirt. What kind of shirt does John have? What is it again? John has a blue shirt. So blue is the modifier that modifies the word or the noun shirt. And so that's what a modifier is. A modifier is a descriptive word that provides detail and description about the object. You got to memorize that sentence because on the quiz they're going to say true or false. Modifiers are words that provide details and description about the object, and you got to write true. And here we're going to go over a dangling modifier. A dangling modifier occurs when the modifier does not logically refer to other words in the sentence. So here you would say, visiting the zoo, the birds chirped loudly. So the birds drove a car and went and visited the zoo? No. Who was visiting the zoo? While I was visiting the zoo, I heard the birds chirp loudly. That's the correct way of writing it. So that means that the person missing its subject here. So who was visiting the zoo? You were visiting the zoo, not the birds. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. Oh, so a car grew legs and walked on the sidewalk? And so what kind of error is in this sentence? And so this is a dangling modifier error. And so then dangling modifier means that you're missing a subject. So while I was walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. Now that's the correct way to write this sentence. So that on the quiz, they're going to ask you, what kind of error is this? Is this a dangling modifier error or some other kind of error? And so dangling modifier simply means missing the subject. While working, an earthquake shook the building. Oh, so the earthquake has a job and is working? No. So correct, it's missing a subject. So in the correct way of saying is, while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. So what kind of error is in this sentence? It's a dangling modifier because it leaves the reader dangling as to saying, but who was working? Was it John was working? While John was working, an earthquake shook the building. That's correct. While Professor H was working, an earthquake shook the building. So as long as you say who was working, you have the correct sentence. But if you leave out the subject, then it's a dangling modifier because you leave us, or the reader, dangling. Having finished the assignment, the TV was turned on. Once again, did the TV grow legs and turn in your assignment? No. It's after I finished the assignment, or after Jan finished the assignment. Then she turned on the TV, or then I turned on the TV. So once again, it's a dangling modifier because you're missing a subject. Having arrived late, a written excuse was needed. And so here, once again, but who wrote that written excuse? And who arrived late? So after I arrived late, a written excuse was needed. Or having arrived late, I gave a written excuse to my boss. And so all of these are all examples of dangling modifiers because you're missing a subject. So the introductory phrase, okay, and then the second kind of modifier mistake is known as misplaced modifiers. A misplaced modifier occurs when a modifier is placed incorrectly in the sentence. And so all of these sentences are examples of misplaced modifiers. In other words, in order to correct the sentence, I have to put the modifier next to the word it modifies in order to correct the sentence. And so whenever you have to change the location of the modifier, that's known as a misplaced modifier mistake. The patient was referred to a therapist with severe problems. And so obviously you're not going to go to a therapist who's crazy, right? It's usually the patient that's crazy, not the therapist. So correct way of saying is the patient with severe psychological problems was referred to a therapist. So here, with severe problems, had to be moved over here in order for the sentence to make sense. That's known as a misplaced. I mean, the modifier is not placed in the correct spot in order for the sentence to make sense. So whenever you have to make that kind of correction, that's known as a misplaced modifier. The new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. How do we fix this sentence? So your front office is wearing a brown suit? No, it's the new employee. So in order to fix this sentence, I would have to say the new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. My uncle just watches one television station. So here you would have to write, my uncle watches just one television station. I will be on the phone making appointments today. And so your phone grew arms and legs and is making appointments for you? No. So here you have to say making appointments has to be placed over here. I will be making appointments. In other words, you're the one making the appointments, not your phone. And so whenever you have to move the modifier to another spot in order to make the sentence make sense, that's known as a misplaced modifier. So I would say, I will be making appointments on the phone today. On her way home, Jan found a gold man's watch. So we're back to James Bond, where somebody's made out of gold, or you're King Midas, and everything you touch is turned to gold. Wow, what a way to get rid of your enemies. You just touch them and they just turn to gold. No, of course not. So Jan found a man's gold watch. And so here the adjective has to be placed over here in order for the sentence to make sense. So that is a misplaced modifier mistake. The torn student's book lay on the desk. And so I'm going to go off to my student and tear him in two? No. Obviously, it's not the student that's torn up, it's the book that's torn up. So here the correct would be the student's torn book lay on the desk. So whenever you got to move the modifier around in order to fix the sentence, that's known as a misplaced modifier mistake. Sentence fragments. Sentence fragments are missing parts of the sentence. Like whenever you have a sentence fragment, it's usually missing something. It's usually missing a subject, missing a verb, missing an object. So that's what makes that sentence a fragment, because a sentence fragment does not express a complete thought. A dependent clause not attached to an independent clause is a sentence fragment. And so here, broke the glass. Who broke the glass? So that's a sentence fragment because it's missing a subject. So the correct answer would be the dog broke the glass. Mr. and Mrs. Smith. That's a sentence fragment because you're missing the verb and the object. So if I wrote Mr. and Mrs. Smith are old people, then you have a complete sentence. So you need to know these sentences for your quiz because these are all examples of sentence fragments. Not to a coworker or secretary. That's a fragment because it's missing a verb and an object. And not sound like a faker. And that's missing also a subject and a verb. When he is fat. That's missing a independent clause, subject, verb, and object. Although she sings. That's also missing subject, verb, and object. If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him, that whole thing is just a subordinating clause, and it's missing a independent clause. So that's it for sentence fragments. Another kind of mistake that's very common are known as run-on sentences. That is when you have two sentences placed together and you either put an unnecessary comma or you forget to put any punctuation whatsoever. If you put an unnecessary comma, if I say something like John eats salad, comma, Mary eats steak, that's an unnecessary comma because you're supposed to put a period after John eats steak, period, Mary eats salad. Then that would be correct. So when you put in an unnecessary comma between two simple sentences, that's known as a comma splice. If you forget to put in your period and you simply say John eats steak, Mary eats salad, and you forget any kind of punctuation, that's known as a fused sentence. That means you have two sentences fused together with no punctuation. And so here are some examples of comma slices. John ate dinner, comma, he went to the restaurant. Now there are several ways in which you can fix this. You can either stick in a comma and then you can put in a coordinating conjunction. Then it becomes correct. John ate dinner and he went to the restaurant. Or you can put in a period. John ate dinner, period, he went to the restaurant. Or you can make it a clause. John, who ate dinner, went to the restaurant. And there's one more that I could add to this, is if you're going to put in a transition word. John ate dinner, and then transition word, in addition, he went to the restaurant. Okay? So there are actually 4 different ways that you can fix this. You can put in your comma and a coordinating conjunction. You can stick in a period. You can make it into 2 sentences if it's the same subject into a relative clause, or you can use a transition word. Those are the 4 ways in which you can correct a comma splice. A fused sentence is when you have 2 sentences with no period after the first sentence. So here you have, or no punctuation. John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. Or, so John ate dinner. So the same way that you correct a comma splice, you correct a fused sentence. So you could have John ate dinner. I believe it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same exact thing. So anyway, you can correct it by having a comma, coordinating conjunction, or you can put in your period, or if it's the same subject, you can use a relative clause, or you can put in a transition word. Here are some examples of comma splices in your quiz. So your quiz is going to ask you, what kind of error is this? Is this a comma splice, or is this a run-on sentence? And so a run-on sentence includes both a comma splice and a fused sentence, in case you're wondering, well, what's the difference? Okay, so let me go back. Both a comma splice and a fused sentence, they're both 2 kinds of run-on sentences. Both of these are run-on sentences. And so run-on sentences includes these 2 both of these. Students get confused about that. So everything, this whole section is about, because they're about two sentences that run on into each other, either because of the unnecessary comma or the lack of any punctuation. Okay, so everything here is a run-on sentence. So here is some, all of these are all run-on sentences. They're just different kinds of run-on sentence. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. This is a comma splice run-on sentence because it has an unnecessary comma. And so you would want to fix it by adding and it was bulging at the top, then it's correct. So here you have, or you could put in a period. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, period. It was bulging at the top. I respect my parents, and here you have an unnecessary comma. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So this is also a comma splice, and you would fix this with, I respect my parents, and I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. Or you could say, I respect my parents, in addition, I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So if you want to avoid saying and all the time in your essay, you can use transition words of addition. That's what in addition is, transition words. So you can Google yourself a transition word list so that you don't say and all the time. Here are some examples of fused sentences from your quiz. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. And now you're missing a comma here. Period. I mean, not a comma, sorry. You're missing a period here. So you put a period here. More than 1 billion people speak it. Or you can say, you can have a transition word. The most popular language in the world is China, period. In addition, more than 1 billion people speak it. George knew the answer to the last essay question. And then you're missing here. So you can put a comma, but he didn't have enough time to write his response. So these are examples of fused sentences because it has no punctuation. And these are examples of comma splices because there's an unnecessary comma between 2 sentences. And these 2 things will be the last 2 things that we're going to do for this quiz. So which sentence demonstrates a possessive subject? So whenever we want to show possession, we want to put an apostrophe S. So here we would say, use apostrophe S to show ownership. The China doll's dress was a sunny yellow. So here you have an apostrophe S to show possession. And so Jack's hat was a bright red. Susan's shoes were too small for her. And here you have a possessive subject because it's the subject of the sentence, and the subject of the sentence always comes before the verb. Here you have a possessive object because the object of the sentence always comes after the verb. And you have a possessive object because it's Darren's house. I live in Darren's house. Do you believe that cooking is a woman's work? All right, that's it for week 7 sentence structure. Now we're going to go over everybody's favorite part of the lesson, which is the practice quiz. If you can get 100% on the practice quiz, then then you're ready for the week 7 quiz. The new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. What kind of error is in this sentence? Is it a dangling modifier, a misplaced modifier, or a no error? So as I said before, the new employee, and here you don't have, the front office is not going to wear a suit, so here I have to move around the modifier in order for it to make sense. So I have to say the new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. So this is known as a misplaced modifier because you have to move the modifier around in order to correct the sentence. I can't choose the correct sentence. I can't seem to find the keys. Oh, well, this is not correct because it's missing an apostrophe. When we use contractions, we always have to have an apostrophe. Same mistake, we're missing an apostrophe. So that's not a correct sentence. So therefore, the correct sentence is, if you aren't going to make it, please call. Here you have a correct sentence because the contraction has an apostrophe, and you have a dependent clause and an independent clause together as one sentence, complex sentence. So that's the correct answer. And not sound like a faker. Is that a complete sentence? No, because it's missing a subject and a verb. So therefore, this is a fragment. Which sentence below is correct? At the age of 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. When I was 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. So obviously, your father was not 4 years old when he taught you to ride a bike. It's when you were 4 years old. So this is a dangling modifier mistake because it's missing a subject. Okay, so B is the correct answer. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. Well, here you have a fused run-on sentence because you're missing a period. So here the correct answer is B. Which sentence is correct? Linda took her daughter to the doctor who has a high fever, or Linda took her daughter who has a high fever to the doctor. So obviously, especially in this day and age of COVID, you're not going to take your daughter to a doctor who's sick, right? So people who are sick are supposed to stay home. So in order for this sentence to be correct, you have to move who has a high fever over to daughter. So this is known as a misplaced modifier mistake. So correct answer is Linda took her daughter who has a high fever to the doctor. So that B is correct. My uncle just watches one television station. So the correct answer to this, since I got to move the modifier around, my uncle watches just one television station. So that is a misplaced modifier. Anytime you have to move the modifier in order to have a correct sentence, then you have a misplaced modifier. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. So here we are missing our period. And so here this is a fused run-on sentence because you have two sentences that run on together, fused together. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. Oh, so your car grew legs and walked on the sidewalk? So obviously that's not a correct sentence. It's supposed to be, while I was walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. So here you have a dangling modifier mistake. So anytime that you're missing the subject, that's known as a dangling modifier because you leave the reader dangling. First of all, one must speak directly to the boss. This is a correct sentence because you have a subject, which is one. Must be sure is the verb. To speak directly to the boss, that's the infinitive object. So subject, verb, object, simple sentence. So A, complete sentence. While an earthquake shook the building. What kind of error is this? Oh, while working. This should be while working. There you go. While working, an earthquake shook the building. what kind of error is this? So an earthquake has a job and is working? No, it's while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. So that is a dangling modifier mistake. If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her, okay, where's the rest of the sentence? Okay, that's not a complete thought. So we know right away when something is not a complete thought, it is a sentence fragment. So therefore the answer is B. Not to a coworker or secretary. Does that express a complete thought? No. So therefore it is a fragment. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. Okay, here you have what happened to the period. Okay, when you finish a sentence, you got to put a period after the end of the sentence. You're supposed to. People learn that in like first grade or something like that. But I see a lot of run-on sentences in essays, nevertheless. And so here you have a run-on sentence. So what is a modifier? Modifier are words that offer details and descriptions about an object. Okay, so this particular quiz didn't have the true or false. Well, that's nice. So A. So when we have a modifier is like an adjective. John wears a blue shirt. Blue, the adjective blue modifies the noun shirt. So blue shirt. So blue, any kind of adjective or even an adverb, they're all modifiers because an adverb is a modifier that modifies a verb, while an adjective is a modifier that modifies a noun. So that's what a modifier is. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. Once again, you're missing punctuation here, you're missing a period, and so therefore you have two sentences fused together, therefore you have a run-on sentence. So here you got to put a period here, and then you capitalize he. And then, or you can put a comma here and add and. See, so if I did something like this, or but. Now you've got a correct sentence. George knew the answer to the last essay question, comma, but he didn't have enough time to write his response. And then you have a compound sentence. Or if I wanted to write, Although George knew the answer to the last essay question, and I stick in a comma over here, he didn't have enough time to write his response. A complex sentence, okay? So if I change the sentence to either a compound or a complex sentence, then it's a complete thought. But since it doesn't have either or, okay, the original was like this. It's not a compound sentence. It's not a complex sentence. It's just two sentences running together. It's a run-on sentence. It's not correct. Does the following sentence contain a misplaced or dangling modifier? So I will be on the phone making appointments today. Your phone is not going to grow legs or arms and make appointments for you. So instead, it's supposed to be, I will be making appointments on the phone today. So that is a misplaced modifier because I have to put making appointments, and whenever I have to put the words modifier in a different location to make the sentence correct, then it is a misplaced modifier. I respect my parents. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. Okay, so here you have an unnecessary comma. That's a comma splice. And as we know, comma splices and fused sentences are both run-on sentences. So therefore, you have two sentences that run together. That's not correct. I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. This is actually a correct sentence. Ooh, for once it's all correct, because here, for means because. Now, we Americans, we don't talk like that. I mean, British people, when they speak, they tend to use for to mean because. Americans will say, I could tell the room had been dusted because all the pictures were crooked. But a British person will say, I could tell the room had been dusted for all the pictures were crooked. And around the world, just for a little, this is not on your quiz, this is just a little caveat. Around the world, British English is considered more proper and more correct than American English. American English is considered around the world too conversational, too much slang. But that's not something you need to know for your quiz. So this is a British sentence. And so here you have all the correct answers. So you check your correct answers here, and and if you can score a 100% with all of these answers, then you're ready for your week 7 quiz. And normally at this point, I ask students if they have any questions, and then I already went over the writing process as being pre-writing, writing, and rewriting. And then I'm just going to review a little bit about how your comparison contrast essay in week 7 is going to be pre-writing, week 8 is writing, week 11 and 12 revision. So I said all of that in the very beginning. If everybody watched the first part, and this week all you have to do is your week 6 final draft, which counts as your midterm your midterm assignment. See, to complete this assignment midterm, and so you just have to make sure you follow these instructions. I am still getting people who are forgetting to double space their paper, or they have different color, different size fonts. Make sure you use Times New Roman, size 12 font, and that sort of thing. Okay? And also I prefer DOCX, Microsoft Word, because it's easier to grade than PDF. But you could use either or. Don't do dot pages. Okay? That is the wrong format. I do not want to see something like this. Okay? I don't want somebody's to have dot pages, because dot pages, this Canvas will not recognize that. So if you have a Mac, you have to remember to go size, to file, save as, DOCX. You have to do an extra step. Okay? You can't use your dot pages on your Mac. For Canvas. And so I already talked over, in week 7 forum, now that we're done with the week 7 quiz, the week 7 forum, you're going to do pre-writing. You're going to choose for me a topic for your comparison contrast essay. What is a comparison contrast essay? So this will be your last essay for this class. So in a comparison contrast essay, you will compare 2 topics, 2 people, 2 events, 2 movies, 2 books, or 2 places. So Los Angeles is a better place to live than New York, because Los Angeles has better beaches, monuments, and food. So Los Angeles has, and then that would be your thesis statement, and then your topic sentences would then match your thesis statement. So this is something you already learned. So this is known as an evaluative thesis statement, and this is known as an alternate. This is known as the alternate method. Okay, so you have the alternate method for comparison contrast essay. All right, so the alternate method is simply your 5-paragraph essay structure. And then you're going to have 2 different kinds of thesis statements. You've got an explanatory thesis statement. An explanatory thesis statement is used if your topic is really difficult and you have to explain to the reader what something is. So if you were to say the difference between wind turbines and solar panels, and then you would explain in your thesis statement, while both wind turbines and solar panels have their own shortcomings, both offer a number of advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so carbohydrate-free and whole grain diet experts agree on one thing: limiting refined sugar is the key to weight loss. The Civil War could be said to have arisen from a fundamental dispute over freedom. Which is more sacred, freedom for individuals or freedom from government? That's a good question. It's like what they're asking each other now. So this is known as an explanatory thesis. This type of thesis statement is used when you are comparing and contrasting 2 things that are difficult to understand for the reader, and then you have to explain some simple facts, hence the word explanatory. All right? But for our purposes, we are using simple topics. So all the topics that they give you that the school gives you as samples in your week 7 forum are all easy topics. So everybody knows the difference between a dog and a cat, or what's it like to be a child versus an adult. So there's no need to explain away, when a child is somebody who is young, while an adult is someone who is grown. I don't want to see those kinds of simple, obvious thesis statements, okay? That's really dull. Instead, I want to see your opinion. Since we're dealing with easy topics and we're not doing explanatory, you're going to be writing what they call an evaluative thesis statement. An evaluative thesis statement is when you give your opinion about the two topics and then you back up that opinion with your body paragraphs. And that's what makes the paper interesting, is to read about what you think about something and then how you back that up with credible evidence. And we're going to go over how to find credible evidence in your week 10 lecture. So we're going to be writing a debatable thesis statement, a debatable evaluative thesis statement to keep it interesting. For example, dogs are better than cats because dogs can be easily groomed, dogs are affectionate, and dogs love treats. And then you can write your 3 body paragraphs about those 3 reasons. Okay? So there's no need to compare. Dogs wag their tail, but cats don't have to bark. Cats meow while dogs bark. And believe it or not, I've had essays that said something that obvious. So you can leave that out and just use your evidence is to back up why you like something. So that's known as an evaluative thesis statement. So here, a good comparison and contrast essay goes beyond a simple listing of similarities and differences to make a meaningful statement about a larger topic. So when you do your pre-writing, you can write a list of all the reasons why you like one thing better than another. That's known as listing. So I looked at the to-do chart and I noticed that at least one person has already turned in their week 7 form. I haven't looked at it yet, so hopefully, I will post more examples of samples next week of good pre-writing listing and all that kind of stuff from previous students when I do the week 7 announcements next week. This week I'm just going to focus on grading your week 6 final drafts. So I only go week by week, Anyway, so here you have the week 7, and here are some of the topics you can write about. 2 different kinds of foods, Coke versus Pepsi, dogs versus cats. As you can see, these are very easy topics. You don't need to explain to me the difference between a dog and a cat. It's not like I'm going to look at a cat and go, oh, that's a dog, or look at a dog and say that's a cat, or something like that. Fruits versus vegetables, childhood versus adulthood. 2 different kinds of music, friends versus family, which is better. Reality show versus sitcoms, emails versus letters, being rich versus being famous, hot weather versus cold weather, books versus movies. So then you can write about Hunger Games, the movie, versus Hunger Games, the book. And which did you like better and why? That would be your essay. And here are others that you could write about. Coke. And when you choose 2 topics, make sure that they are of the same category. You're not going to write Coke versus Mozart, or Ronald Reagan versus a car, or something like that. So they've got to remain in Coke is a drink, Pepsi is a drink, and therefore you compare the 2 drinks. You got to make sure they got something in common to begin with. Star Trek versus Star Wars, both of them have science fiction in common. Home cooked food versus restaurant food, Trump versus Biden, Republican versus Democrat, Christianity versus any other world religion, jazz versus classical music, any sport versus another sport, glasses versus contacts, north versus south, cash versus credit, etc. So you could read through all of this, and find one that's interesting for you to write about. There's something for everybody, is what I always tell people. And you are also welcome to request a topic of your choice. If you have something that's not on the list you want to write about, you can then get my approval and then write about it. Okay, just email me. So here's an example. I just did this. Alternate is also the alternate method of writing comparison contrast, is also known as point by point, also known as side by side. So different grammar books, English books, will call it different names. I can't remember what your book might call it, either point by point or side by side. Don't remember. Anyway, so this is an example of the alternate method. We already went over that. And then another way to write your comparison contrast essay is the block method, or also known as one side at a time method, or subject by subject method. It all means the same thing. In other words, in the block method, you have the same thesis statement. Los Angeles is a better place to live than New York because of the fantastic beaches, the Mexican food, and the movie studio. So you can use the same reasons, but instead of, you would write all about New York in one paragraph, then you write all about California in another paragraph, and you have your conclusion. But when you write about New York, you got to write about New York beaches, New York Mexican food, New York culture, in that order, in 5 to 7 sentences. And then you compare it in your California paragraph with California beaches, California Mexican food, and California culture, in that order, in 5 to 7 sentences. I always tell students, if you tend to be someone who talks a lot, like you tend to talk, like that, then I suggest you use the alternate method. If you are the type of person who's very concise and you talk very little, unless it's something really important, then you should use the block method. It's for people that are really good at being concise, to the point, would use the block method, and yakety people will use the alternate method. And I'm the yakety because I've gone on over an hour for this lesson alone, so naturally I would tend for the alternate method for writing my comparison. And point by point is another alternate method example. Okay, so you can read through all of this, and then you can, that's it, all right? So you can read through all of this. Los Angeles is a great place, it really is a great place to live, especially the beaches. And then you have home-cooked hamburgers are better than fast food hamburgers because of the taste, the nutrition, and the price. So here you would have taste, nutrition, and price. Now I'm going to jump to the week 8 assignment, and when you do your week 8 assignment, you can just write out an outline like this, and then just write your rough draft. Okay, so if you don't want to do the outline worksheet that they give you in the week 8 assignment, you can just give me your rough draft with either a point-by-point method or a rough draft with your block method. Okay, you can jump ahead and use week 8 as your rough draft week. That way I can correct your rough draft so that when you upload your rough draft in week 11, it's already corrected, it's already got all the templates done, and then you're ready for week. And then we will all talk about your, peer review your, just like we did in week 5. We'll all peer review your second essay like we did in week 5 in week 11. And then in week 12 will be like week 6, like right now, where we just sit back and we revise, hand it in, and we wait for the next class to start. That's week 12. And so you're just going to basically go through the writing process again with essay 2, except for week 9 and week 10. That's the exception. Because in week 9, you're going to write a wholly different essay, and week 10, you're going to work on APA, which everybody has trouble with. All right. So next week, I'm going to talk about transition words. Okay? So if you have trouble with your transition words, parallel structure, pie structure, APA formatting, and you want some more examples on block and alternate method, then I will go over all of these things in my week, next week's in my next section, in my next session. So let's see, what's that going to say? Oh, so let me stop the share. And so if you have any questions, I'm hoping that you're all having a great summer session too. I hate the humidity out here in California. We're so used to dry weather, and now it's all humid for the last 3 weeks, and I'm not used to the humidity. I've gotten spoiled by the dry weather out here in California. Anyway, so if you have any questions at all, feel free to email me. And I hope to see you all next week.